go. We'll do it live. Click the button.
Just
Welcome to your awakening. Please take form as your reality is adjusted.
Welcome back again, folks. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Just checking out the stream is going. Hopefully you can see all that. And you can hear me okay. I haven't been able to find a way yet of boosting the volume on my microphone. I might be able to in the near future if I can get something set up. But for now, hopefully you can hear me all right and the volumes will be okay. Welcome back once again. Another edition of Sol Excalibre on the first day of June 2020, the year of vision, 2020 vision. 'Tis the 1st of June, 1/6. We are into the summer proper now, so what a surprise. They've been changing things again. But we'll get into that in a bit. First of all, I want to say hello to Gary, Society of the Spectacle. Welcome back again. And I want to, rather than me do my usual blathering monologue for now, mate, if there's anything you want to jump in and say, because I know you'll have to log off soonish. So just, if you're not already gone outside to have a quick smoke, because he's in the internet cafe, and of course you're not allowed to smoke indoors anymore. So he might have just nipped out, but I will talk for a moment or two until he gets back in.
no, that's good. You go for it, Cookie. You go for it. Not much to say.
Okay, well, talking about some of the stuff that's been going on this week, and I know there's an immense amount that's been happening within the last few days that will sort of be the main topic of conversation for most people, and it's not as if there isn't lots of other things happening already and carrying on. I'm not saying that because I intend to avoid the subject, not at all. I will be mentioning some of the stuff that's happened in the last several days. And why, in the subtitle this week, in the info box underneath, it says, "There is no immunity to the truth." Now, somewhat paraphrase a quote from Ayn Rand, Ayn Rand. Some people pronounce it as Ayn Rand. I'm not sure how you're exactly supposed to pronounce it, but as long as you get the reference. Ayn Rand, who said, quote, "You can ignore reality, but you cannot ignore the consequences of ignoring reality," end quote. And I think it makes a good reference point. And why I put in the subtitle this week, because as I'm sure well aware, for the last few months, dependent on what country you were in, I know some places like Brazil haven't had any kind of lockdown, but for most of us around the world, you have been in some form of lockdown or quarantine because of the alleged walrus, a cuckoo, a chew, are you the walrus? So for most of us, we have been in lockdown. So the main topic of conversation for many people has been about that alleged virus, pathogen, pandemic, epidemic, whatever the hell it is, supposedly, is it even real or not, etc., etc. And as of today, here in the UK, we have now been allowed, our great benevolent golden-haired dictator has said we're now allowed to gather in groups of, up to 6 people. And you can have barbecues again, as long as you stand, keep your hands 6 feet apart, keep the burger buns 6 feet apart, Well, I'm being silly, obviously, but you get the idea. We've now been allowed a bit more freedom. That should have bunny ears on it as well. We've been allowed out of lockdown a little bit more. And in some places, They have been supposedly opening up the schools again as of today, 1st of June. But I think most of them are not going to see the kind of attendance that they used to have. A lot of parents, I'm not sure who did the poll on this. It was the poll that was sort of doing the rounds in the mainstream media a few days ago here in the UK. They asked parents, are you going to send your kid back to school in these new social distance requirement setup that they've been implementing in the schools, with the desks however many feet apart and every student having to use alcohol sanitizer on their hands every 5 minutes and blah 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 blah. And the majority of parents, more than 60% I think it was, said no, they would not be sending their kids back to school. It wasn't exactly clear in the general headlines on most of the media coverage of that information. They just left you with the impression that no, the parents won't be sending their kids back to school. But when you read through the articles, the general media output that is using that poll to make a point to the public, I suppose, to put ideas in their heads, the general body of the article would explain that, well, the reason they're not sending their kids back to school is not because they disagree with the ridiculously over the top and psychologically damaging social distancing bullshit that has been implemented in the schools. No, the reason they don't want to send their kids to school is because they're still so afraid of the alleged pathogen that they don't feel their children would be safe at school from the alleged pathogen. So therefore, they don't want to send them into those institutions again. Spin, spin, twist, twist, spin, spin. The media being used to spin a lot of the reality into something that continues to serve the narrative, the agenda's narrative. Because when I've asked people who have children that are school age, what do you think of what's being implemented in the schools? They say, oh, it's crazy. That's madness. I wouldn't want to be a kid in that school. No way. So I think the majority of parents who don't want to send their kids back to school is because they see how it would be unhelpful, unhealthy, damaging to their children to be in that kind of environment, not because of the risk of the pathogen. If people are still seriously thinking that that alleged risk of the pathogen is real, there is an immense amount of data now that is accumulating to show that even if you accept the claims that there is a particular mutation of the coronavirus that they have designated as COVID-19, or otherwise known as SARS-CoV-2, then the risk, and this is from the CDC itself, which we sort of touched on in the reality chat last Wednesday night on Reality Chat channel, even the CDC itself is now admitting, it has been for a couple of weeks now, that the potential risk from the alleged pathogen is 0.26%. That's less than the seasonal flu. So if you still believe what the mainstream media is pumping at you day after day, here in the UK in particular, they're not putting down the lie. They will not give up the lie. They can't. They know they can't, because it would completely destroy them and their claims to any kind of authority. So they're still perpetuating the lie here in the UK that it's so amazingly dangerous and deadly. Look at how many numbers there are, but don't mention that we manipulate them with numbers all over the place. No, look at how many numbers. Oh, it's so dangerous. So many people, I say so many, I think it's getting less and less day after day, week after week. A lot of people are still believing that the virus is real and deadly the way they were initially frightened by it when the information was first started to be pushed into the mainstream UK media. So them being able to suddenly change their mind, I think it was De Bourg, was it? I'm thinking of a quote in my head, and I know I'm paraphrasing it terribly, and I can't even remember the proper attribution for it, but men go mad in crowds and come to their senses slowly and one by one. So what we're watching at the moment is that slow realization that's percolating through the general populace in the UK that you were initially frightened by a terrifying phantom menace that was shaken in front of you by the juju doctors of the witch mongering of the media press, to terrify you to such a degree that you were so convinced that there was this deadliness right outside your door that you didn't want to go out. You were covering yourself in bags and cloth and wiping your hands constantly with alcohol sanitizer. That actually wasn't anywhere near the kind of threat that they initially made it out to be. So that terrifying, scary phantom menace creature that they waved at you turned out to be a little yapping dog. The bark was far bigger than its, I'm going to say alleged again, its alleged bite. So what we're seeing is that slow realization starting to percolate through the general populace. And I think to a certain degree, the government's narrative has allowed for this process to take place. They've had to do damage control to a certain degree. And this is why here in the UK now we're starting to get that easing of the lockdown that was talked about ages ago, right back to the beginning of all this. And as people pointed out, it's included in the narrative of Event 201 when they talk about the infodemic and how people will only put up with being quarantined for so long, and then they'll start to push back and they'll want their freedoms back, etc. So, are the schools going back today? Yes, some of them are. Some of them are opening up again now, but whether the parents send their kids back to school or not is a completely different thing. Hopefully more parents will have the opportunity and take the opportunity to be able to homeschool their children, or at least interact with their children more than they ever have done in the past when it comes to things like education and where they're getting their education from and stuff like that. Now that a lot more parents do have the time available to them because they've been furloughed by the lockdown and the narrative that has convinced them that they can't go back to work because their job is not essential. And if they're not working an essential job, then of course that means they don't have the magic immunity that seems to have been bestowed upon other certain members of the public that are fulfilling essential jobs. So all those workers in warehouses that are processing all the packaged goods that you have sent to your home by the postman are also seemingly magically immune to all this stuff, and all the policemen and the firemen and all these people are magically immune to this super deadly illness that you're supposed to be afraid of because they're doing essential jobs. Your job wasn't essential, so you don't have that magic immunity. Ignoring reality. And the general sort of synopsis of why I called this week's subtitle and that there is no immunity to the truth is to try and extrapolate on that reality that you can ignore reality, but you can't ignore the consequences of ignoring reality. In other words, you can keep feeding a bubble of denial, but when the truth is never going to change, it's never going to go away, it's not going to stop being the truth, it's not going to not be the truth because you're upset with it, you think it's unfair, you feel offended by the way the truth is the truth, however you want to define it. You can keep building walls like Pink building his wall. Oh, mother, is it okay if I build the wall to keep the reality out because the truth is unpleasant, so I want to just stay in this false reality, this denial of reality. But lo and behold, what is emerging is the consequences of denying reality. And that you can't ignore. You cannot ignore the reality that there is a Stasi state, a police state, a supposed surveillance state. Where does the surveillance go to? It goes to the judiciary, the police, the armed forces, etc. So therefore, police state, surveillance state is just a soft language version of the same thing. So that's a lot of what we're witnessing at the moment, what we're being subjected to, what we are being victimized by. I know some people have a difficulty with that problematic area of, oh, it's just victim culture, mate. Oh, why don't you do something about it? So I think you'll find a lot of people are trying to do something about it. And lo and behold, over the last week, you've seen more of that. Look, this is, I'll take the opportunity then to step into talking about some of the stuff that's happened over the last week. One thing just straight out the gate, straight away, because I think this is really worth reiterating, because I'm not surprised that this has come up again at the moment. I do think that the one of the main narratives that has been played out over the last few years, and I ranted about this a lot over last year and into this year, was the changing over of the basic structure of the systems of law and legality from what used to be the accepted way that it worked, that there would be some form of maximum individual, like the king or the queen, a monarch or a head of state, who acted as the ultimate end point of the structure of the laws, like the Supreme Court sits on top of all the other courts. It's a hierarchical system. And the narrative needs all that to change so that people will accept a one world global governmental system that doesn't have any monarchs or heads of state, because it's just a massive bureaucracy. It's actually a technocracy with officers, agents that will act like corporate bureaucrats within that structure. But there will be no singular head of state or monarch as an individual that can be held culpable for whatever is done under their reign, their control. But it didn't surprise me when this particular storyline came up again about one Hallett, Australian guy who comes from a lineage where they claim that they can claim royal blood to Great Britain, and therefore he's actually the real king, and the current queen and her consort Philip are not rightful rulers, and therefore what's happening at the moment is like a dethroning of those that have unlawfully claimed the crown, and it's going to get swapped back to this family line that's this Australian guy, and blah, blah. It's just more disguise, more cover story for the reality that any claims to sovereignty over a nation state, and in this reference it's talking about Great Britain, UK and Northern Ireland, is being transferred to an international state, a global bureaucracy that has nothing to do with family lineage, bloodlines that claim that they have the right to rule because they're from such and such family heritage. That is being done away with. Over the last few years, they've deliberately eroded the public's perception and concept of the royal family here in the UK. That's because they're getting ready to, in effect, dethrone them. And any idea in the public that the Queen represents the power of the people and she still has the lawful authority to change the laws and implement new laws, or, do the stuff that we want, and she acts as the ultimate check and balance to what all these dirty politicians are trying to do. And it's such a delusion. It's a bargaining delusion. It's been the same narrative that's been played out under the auspices, under the disguise of Trump, as being an outsider who's getting rid of the deep state and draining the swamp and all that shit. They're doing the same thing with the royal narrative here in the UK. So there's been various things that have happened recently, including the covering up of the crest outside Buckingham Palace and things like this. They're fueling that narrative that will make people either accept without true comprehension or just ignore the reality that their system of legality and law, the judiciary, the courthouses, etc., all been, their authorities all been shifted to this non-national, this amorphous, globalized, like the cloud, the internet cloud, this amorphous bureaucracy that will not be addressable by the people of that nation, because the concept of nation itself is being eroded. You are no longer a British subject or citizen. You will be a citizen of the global structure who happens to live in the federalized state that is called Great Britain. At the moment, that transition is working towards the European superstate element, but that European superstate is just one part of the global infrastructure. So yeah, that's been bandied around here in the UK for the last week or so, with some of those elements, like, nobody's seen the Queen for ages, and when she does turn up, she's wearing civvy clothing, so therefore what she's saying is not lawful. She's not making proclamations or whatever. She's just talking as a civvy, and the crest being covered up and stuff like that. And it's all playing the same delusion bargaining process of, oh, well, you got fed up with these rulers, so how about this new brand of ruler that's just been made? We just rolled them off the production line. This new brand of ruler is more like you. He's an Aussie, therefore, he's a bit more down to earth. He likes a beer with the Sheilas while they're standing around the barbecue. And, oh, did you know you can now go and have a barbecue again? You've been allowed to go and meet your friends and have a barbecue. So you can all crack a tinny and celebrate the new Aussie king that's coming to take over and fix everything. Oh, it's disgustingly manipulative, because it still perpetuates people's concept that there will be some form of individual, a monarch or head of state, some kind of ruler that they will be able to take their grievances to and say, excuse me, the super state stomped on my head and I'm not happy about it. I'm offended. I've got my placard to say I'm offended, or I want redress. Can you fix the problem, please, Mr. Ruler? It's not going to be working that way anymore, folks, but it creates that romanticized delusion that you will have some form of redress or being able to put your grievances to somebody who is in a position of culpability and control. It's not going to happen. I put in my notes as well, the crankies' threats of collective punishment. This is just some of the stuff that's been coming out of Scotland in the last few days, because they're starting to ease the lockdown a bit as well. But cranky woman put out a statement saying, but you better not take the piss. You shouldn't gather too much on the beaches. You shouldn't go to the touristy spots, because if you're naughty, we'll take away your privileges. So what she's basically saying is you will suffer collective punishment, which, if you go and look at the Nuremberg trials, is one of the crimes against humanity. So if they're talking about implementing collective punishment, they're breaking the UN conventions. And yet she seems to think that Scotland will be independent by joining the EU, which means they'll be even more so subject to that legal structure that contradicts the resulting crimes against humanity that were formulated out of the Nuremberg trials. And they're doing the same in England. It just stood out that that's been happening in the last few days as a lockdown has been eased a little, but they're still there saying, but you better do as you're told, otherwise we'll crack down on you. There'll be collective punishment. Yeah. So let's get into no immunity to the truth and the current blue virus that is being spread around. Now that they're losing control of the narrative over the infected crown, what I've affectionately been referring to as the walrus, You know, the virus, the walrus. Are you the walrus? They've been losing control of that narrative. A lot more of the general public are starting to realise that even if they think there might be something to it, it's not as dangerous as they first were told. So therefore, you know, they want to carry on about their day. They want to get back to normal. Wave my hands. They want to get back to normal, and they want to be able to go out and go to the beach and, you know, do all the good stuff that people like doing. So the system, the main manipulators, are losing control of that fear element of that virus. So instead, they start amplifying a different virus. And this is certainly at the moment relevant to what's happening in the USA. Thankfully, so far, nothing like this has been happening here in the UK. I know there's been protests in other countries where it's ended up in violence, in some places, even fatal violence, where protesters have been shot by the police forces and shot dead for protesting against the quarantines, the lockdowns, the bullshit, the scamdemic. But at the moment, over the last week in the USA, another man was killed by a man wearing a costume in front of multiple witnesses. Oh, we lost Gary. Maybe he had to log off for the night. If yes, thanks for joining, Gary. I'm sure we'll chat again soon. Hopefully they'll be able to open a bit longer in the internet cafe soon, so you can stay for a bit longer for a chat. Sorry, tidying my desk up. Yeah, a man killed another man in broad daylight in front of multiple witnesses, in front of witnesses that he knew full well was videoing him, was taking pictures and video of what he was doing. But when you watch that video, you can see he's got no emotion on his face other than maybe a hint of disdain, but really he's quite emotionless considering what he's doing, what he's participating in, because he wasn't the only one pinning George Floyd to the ground. There were other officers that were out of view of the main video that's usually shown, but he was the one that was kneeling on George Floyd's neck. George Floyd's neck, if I can say it properly. And now we're in a situation where there's multiple riots in cities around the USA. Another, what is in effect race war or race riots, has been implemented based on one incident of one guy wearing a costume that he thinks gives him the authority to murder somebody in broad daylight and get away with it, and somebody who has been subjected to that fatal abuse because allegedly they were trying to use a fake fiat note, which is almost an oxymoron, a fake fiat note, but supposedly, allegedly was originally stopped and arrested because he was trying to pass a counterfeit $20 note, which I made a note of. Potential connections here of them implying that the use of paper money is risky, whereas if all your money was on a device, if it was all electronic, you wouldn't be in that danger of being accused of trying to pass a counterfeit note, would you? So therefore this wouldn't happen to you, kind of thing. But this is all lost in the chaos now. Those kind of details have been lost in all the massive events and media covering this situation. But one of the other main things I noted is, here we go yet again, not yet again that it's a black guy or a person of a minority being abused by a supposed white guy, even though from what I've seen and listened to other people talking, he wasn't exactly like your classic white guy. But there's that race element being deliberately portrayed. But when I was saying, here we go yet again, it was more about the fact, the reality, that the mainstream media showed you the death of somebody live on, well, recorded on camera. And when this story first broke, the initial videos that were broadcast in the USA showed near enough the entire clip. So they showed it all the way up to the point that the guy obviously loses consciousness. And it's pretty obvious that, you know, there's not much after that. According to the current official story as it's been repeated, he was declared dead in the ambulance. So in other words, he died after he was put on the gurney unconscious and whatever, but the moment of death was when he loses consciousness and the guy's still kneeling on him. So yet again, the mainstream media completely contradicts their claims to not show you horrible scenes even on the news. No, they showed it, and they showed it, and they showed it, and they showed it. And this spread all around the world. It wasn't just the USA media that was doing this, where they were repeatedly showing that imagery. Here in the UK, they repeatedly showed it on the news. You go, here you go, you know, we promised to never show you horrible images from war scenes and terrorist actions, but here's a video clip of a guy being asphyxiated to death live in broad daylight in front of witnesses. We'll show you that. Why? It's not because they care about you having access to the in context evidence available on a certain case. No, because it wasn't completely in context. There was lots of other context about the situation that wasn't covered by that initial media outpouring. The initial media outpouring was only concerned with one thing: repeatedly show the image of a white police officer kneeling on the neck of a black guy who'd just been arrested for questionable or spurious accusations. In other words, the black guy had done nothing wrong, and the white guy was abusing his position of office and murdering the black guy. Race war, race war, race war, race war. Perfectly timed to pick up that narrative that they had been, you know, the ball that they had been dropping over the narrative to do with the scandemic and how everybody has to stay in their homes because of this alleged deadly pathogen. Now all of a sudden it's, oh, everybody in the streets rioting, fuck the social distancing, fuck the wearing masks unless you're trying to cover up your face because you're doing some criminal damage. You know, you want to loot a store, so you put a bandana around your face like a classic outlaw from the Wild West. But other than that, you know, where's the fear of the virus gone all of a sudden? The public's reaction proved that a lot of the public don't give any credence to that fear of the virus anymore. But now they're afraid of being either attacked by the blue virus, the police forces, just because they happen to go to a protest, or they're afraid of the bad guys in the minorities that are going to come and get them and steal their stuff. And all of this is one big mix of accusations of certain groups causing this deliberately. And it's mixed so well that it can be difficult to pick out the different ingredients, but there's a lot of ingredients been added into this mix. In Minnesota, they initiated the use of contact tracing to trace all the people who'd been at one of the protests when things first started allegedly getting out of hand. So remember what I said earlier about, you know, surveillance state is a police state. It's just another way of saying police state. Contact tracing is another way of saying surveillance technology, which is another way of saying the police state. They are initiating a Stasi state environment to replace the quarantine environment that they've lost control of the narrative for. So as people are less afraid, and also because many people are becoming I say more desperate, but that doesn't necessarily mean in a bad way. It's just they're getting to the end of their ability to deal with the situation without being able to do things like go back to work, to earn money, to pay for whatever, to buy food and stuff like that. This thing has been dragged on for multiple months now, so that for a lot of people, they are at the point of they need to be going back to normal life. Otherwise, they cannot sustain their life anymore. Now in many places, the suicide rate outnumbers the supposed fatalities from the alleged pathogen. If we've reached that stage, then it really should make you stop and think, well, hang on, why were we afraid of the pathogen? If the suicides resulting from the fallout of the lockdown supposed quarantine effect is more suicide numbers than the actual pathogen would have killed, even if we didn't lock down, we've done something very wrong. We need to backtrack. But here in the UK, the government is still repeating the lie because they cannot put the lie down, because if they do, their culpability and their it's not even like incompetence in office. Their culpability of being part of a lie to manipulate the public will become obvious, and they know they will be held accountable. Even though at the moment, and like I was ranting about last week, just how accountable some people will be if you're still relying on the same judiciary system is questionable. But if this lie really does fall apart, then a lot of that structure itself is going to come into question. So there will be a whole reshuffling. And in that reshuffling of the infrastructure of the judicial system, then maybe, possibly, a lot of those people will face some kind of culpability, some kind of process of justice. So they don't want to give it up. And at the worst end of that scale, they could potentially face violent revolution, which obviously they'd prefer to keep it semi-violent so they can keep in control and not lose too much stuff. They don't want everything destroyed because they still want to have the perks and benefits that they want, so they don't want the whole infrastructure of society burnt down. They want a controlled burn, which is why for ages now, for a year plus, I've been talking about that fake phoenix effect and how they will attempt to spark a phoenix fire to destroy just enough of the system so that they can convince enough of the people to go along with the changes that they want to implement. And in recent weeks, I've mentioned the COINTELPRO element in reference to other things that have been happening here on YouTube, but when the stuff started happening in the USA over the last week, even more so, he's like, here we go again, folks. Here's another really good example of how you can see COINTELPRO in operation. There is now a building wave of evidence that many of the supposed protesters that were turning up for some of these events in the USA that have happened since George Floyd's death, like the Black Lives Matter protests or people just protesting against the brutality, etc. A lot of them have been either outright orchestrated by certain background groups that are funded and influenced by certain other groups. I'm sure you're well aware of all the accusations that are flying backwards and forwards at the moment. Antifa, Black Lives Matter, Soros, and the right-wing version of that. They've got to have the dialectic opposite. Oh, everybody blame the left so that everybody runs to the right, and then the right gets the same thing. Everybody blame the right, so everyone runs to the right, playing that left-right game, just like they're trying to manipulate and use the race element of the black people versus white people. They're losing control of the narrative of the lie of the scandemic and persuading people to do as they're told because of the fear of the alleged virus. So instead, they go back to some tried and trusted methods. The divide and conquer, the Hegelian pitting of two sides against each other, the left of the politics versus the right of the politics, or the black demographic versus the white demographic. And please don't forget there were some certain elements that led into this in such amazingly coincidental timing, like the incident of the black guy bird watching in Central Park in New York, when he's, a white woman takes offense at him being there and she phones the police on him and stuff like that. And then there's Joe Biden saying, if you vote for Trump, you're not black. These are tried and trusted dog whistle ideological elements that the political system relies on to manipulate the public en masse. And then I'd also add this in because I think this is something maybe doesn't get mentioned that often anymore, or certainly not for a long time, because it was much more relevant when we were discussing events that were of a questionable nature as to whether they were a real event or some kind of false flag or something like that. But it's a terminology that helps explain the concept that an event does not necessarily have to be completely hoaxed from top to bottom for it to actually have been engineered by the system to serve their purpose in some fashion. One quote that's been put out a lot in the past few days is never let a good crisis go to waste. So if the situation around George Floyd's death is genuine and what we was witnessing was an outright psychopath blatantly murdering someone in front of witnesses because he thought he could get away with it because he had a magic uniform on or something like that, that's quite possible. But it's also possible that in some degree, or to even a complete degree, that situation was engineered or influenced. And the couple of terminologies that I'll bring up again that hasn't been mentioned for a long time is LIHOP and MIHOP. That is LIHOP, LIHOP, and MIHOP, MIHOP. And in reference to things like an event that may be of a questionable nature, such that you want to critically investigate, is this a hoax, false flag of some form? LIHOP represents the possibility that it is a let it happen on purpose situation. So, for example, they know full well that if certain ideological groups come together in one place, they're going to end up having fisticuffs. So just like the police do here in the UK, they keep the fans of different football groups, football clubs in separate areas so that they don't fight with each other, because when they get too close to each other, they end up wanting a scrap. In the same manner, you've got the Antifa versus the right wing, like what is it called, the Proud Boys or something, if you have those two ideological elements turn up at a protest and you let them get too close to each other, they end up wanting to have a scrap and blah, blah, blah. The system is aware of these kind of parts of society. Of course they are, because their surveillance state is monitoring a lot of that stuff, and their own agencies are generating a lot of that activity right from the root. So they allow a situation to develop where those two groups end up coming together at some situation such that they know a fight will happen, and then they can have the cameras there ready to record and go, look, folks, look at the riot going on because of these crazy people. LIHOP, let it happen on purpose. As a lot of the video evidence is now starting to accumulate of the riots that are currently taking place in the USA, a lot of the police forces have been told to stand down, basically, and let it happen. Let the looters come in and rob businesses and destroy shit so that the cameras for the news media can get lots of good footage and show everyone how terrible and how dangerous these people are and blah, 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 blah. And I'm not saying that to condone theft and looting and stuff, not at all. But that's a LIHOP example. They know full well that if they instruct the local police to, like, don't get involved, guys, you'll only get beaten up, just stand back and let them run amok, and, you know, we'll deal with the destruction afterwards. That's a lie, Hop. They know full well what will happen. They know the thugs and the criminals will come in and take advantage of the situation, and then they can be there to get the photo up. And then there's my Hop, make it happen on purpose. And that's when you get into the, you know, definite false flag elements, because if they're making it happen on purpose, then that's like entrapment. There would never have been a problem until they come along and caused it to become a problem. But a MyHop doesn't, again, a MyHop doesn't necessarily mean, it doesn't automatically indicate that the event was completely staged or hoaxed or done in a CGI studio or some shit like that. It doesn't at all. Most of the time for the agencies, it is far more practical and far more economical in terms of their budgets and their available manpower for them to actually make things happen in the real world. So if they knew, if they had a profile, a dossier on that police officer Chauvin, they might have known full well that, you know, maybe it was in his profile. He has psychopathic tendencies, has a case history of being reprimanded for excessive force or an abuse of people in custody or something like that. You know, maybe he's got a bit of a history. So they just create or enable a situation where he gets the opportunity to do something like that, and lo and behold, there's people there to film it, and it goes out on the internet, and boom, there you go, there's your required event to act as a spark, as an initiation point to set a fire. And immediately there were groups, elements that immediately stepped in as soon as this started and tried to steer it in certain directions. So like I said earlier about that pot being such a mix of elements that for the general populace, they look at the situation and it just seems chaotic and destructive to them. It's like, what's going on here? There's nothing but these bad guys protesting and causing mayhem and destroying everything. There's a lot of good evidence out there that shows for the locals who maybe live in the areas where this crap is happening, they're out there trying to have a protest, a peaceful protest, or maybe a non-compliance of some form. You know, they're not going to leave the street. They're going to stand in the street and block traffic. That's non-compliance actions. Yeah, they're trying to do that kind of thing to raise awareness and to raise their grievances against the state. And in come these outsiders that are not even from the local area, and they're doing things like putting out blocks, stacks of bricks ready to be used in a riot. They're organizing people into black bloc groups. When you see people taking black bloc actions, they don't operate, even though they may seem to a general observer in a crowd at a protest, you may think they're just acting somewhat randomly and they're just dressed in black because they don't want to be identified and stuff like that. No, there's organization that happens, and there's an organized element to how they go about what they're doing. They're told certain elements to target. And there's evidence of this going back in his, you know, I say through history, a lot of it is recent history. Some of this has become more apparent, and there's been more evidence built up about this kind of methodology. They will say target certain chain stores because they know that the corporation that runs those chain stores has already accounted for the losses in their corporate budgeting for the year. So it's like, yeah, we can destroy several of those chain stores and it's not really going to affect the economy. But at the same time, all the mom and pop shops, the independent businesses that are the other shops along that shop front in between the two corporate chain stores, they get destroyed as well, which means it's yet more of that middle class independent trader being destroyed and absorbed back into the system of the corporatist control structure over the economy and resources. And I think it was, again, I can't remember the quote, and I didn't think to look it up before. Sorry, I should have done earlier. But from Malcolm X, he talked at length about these kind of subjects. And one of the main things he said, I can't remember the quote properly, but it goes along the lines of, if you're not careful, the media will have you hating the victims and championing the abusers. Yeah, the media acts as a very media, the goddess Medea, etc. This medium acts as a very good place, a middle ground, a middleman, where an inversion can take place. Yeah, it doesn't necessarily mean that that is always true, but it can be manipulated. It can be used in that way. The illusionist relies on the medium of the fact that you're an audience watching them put on a show. Yeah, and the illusion takes place in the fact that you can't see through that medium of how the trick is done. In the same manner, the mainstream media, and in some independent supposed alternative media, whatever, the media in this modern technological age can be, and often is, used as a point of inversion. So they're portraying a lot of the people there, they're putting them in a stereotyping one-size-fits-all grab bag and saying anyone going out to these protests is automatically a bad person, they're violent, they're aggressive, they're looters, they're destroying shit. And then on the opposite side as well. So they're trying to make it all about how it's one political ideological element, like the neo-Nazi white supremacist on the far right versus the Antifa and the Black Lives Matter on the far left. All utter bullshit to confuse the situation, but to create stock footage that is now being constantly, repeatedly shown on the mainstream news media. Yeah, look at all the rioting, look at all the looting, look at how many places of businesses that have been burnt down. And the fact that you have been shown, and they're still doing it now, even several days later, the imagery still keeps being repeated. You were shown the murder of somebody by a guy, forget what race he is for now, because the main point is about you being abused psychologically by a tyranny that uses fear to dominate you. You've been shown a video of a guy being blatantly murdered in front of witnesses by another guy who thinks he's allowed to do that because he's wearing a certain costume that supposedly represents some form of authority. That authority supposedly invested in those people who do that kind of job by the very population that they're supposed to be doing the job for. The classic cliche of they should be peacekeepers, not police enforcers. I know that's not true for all the people that go into that job. But that's supposedly the principle. That's the concept that most people accept the presence of the police for, because they're there to deal with the naughty people, the bad people, the dangerous situations when bad people have a freak out or whatever. We ask that there's somebody who's willing to fulfill that role of being a peacekeeper and deal with those situations, so that we as individual people of the world, we don't have to do that job, because they're willing to take on that responsibility, supposedly. That's the cliched concept, the simplified and romanticized concept of how the idea of the police is presented to the public. But the reality is far different. And in that video imagery and the still imagery of that situation, they yet again use those elements of, because one is wearing a uniform, they think that gives them the right to abuse the other. And it erodes that reliance of the public on the police actually doing a job of being peacekeepers, of actually having any consideration or intention to perform that, I'll say role. I was going to say duty, but I don't think it's fair to really define it as a duty because they take it on voluntarily for a wage packet. So they take on that role. We ask them to do that and they supposedly take it on. But for a lot of them, all they really care about is the wage packet. That's why they're doing it. And it's why it attracts people who have an abusive personality type, because they can have fun while they earn money, basically. And they can earn more money by doing stuff that is, off the books and whatever. But anyway, don't want to digress into, pointing at all the police and saying all cops are bastards. I don't think that's 100% true. But unfortunately, it's a general truth. So, I'd also mention as well as an example of the tyranny, not just that imagery, but that some of the other that's come on afterwards, like after the curfews have been implemented in some cities. And in one video clip footage that I watched a couple of nights ago, there's I think they're a family, part of one family, but there's some people stood on the porch of their house. It's in Minnesota, and the police are en masse walking down the road in their full riot gear with paintball guns, paintball guns filled with pepper balls. And they shout at this family to get back in their house, and they don't immediately react. Somebody's obviously filming from amongst the family group on the porch. The police are shouting at them to go back in the house. They don't immediately react. So one of the police says, "Light them up," which is, slang for saying shoot them. And somebody with a pepper ball gun starts shooting them. What were they doing? They were standing on the porch of their own home. There was no riot happening. It was a quiet street. There was just a mob of police, the blue virus, walking up that road. And because they had the audacity to stand outside their own front door, the tyranny needs to put them back in their place and exert its claim to authority, just like a bully, just like an abusive personality, just like a psychopath who has to exert, they have to demonstrate their dominance over the other. So they shoot these people for no reason whatsoever. And yes, it's only paintballs, but they can still cause serious damage. And really, the question of how much damage was caused, I think, dilutes the base principle of this was yet again a demonstration of that overt tyranny. You no longer believe us when we tell you you have to stay in your house because of an alleged virus. So instead, we're going to tell you you have to stay in your house because we have to dominate the streets to deal with these crazy rioting people that are upset that we kill some of them. Have you realised you're in a police state yet, folks? A while ago, I did a little video where I just read out the main part of the Rockefeller documents, the lockstep narrative. You find that video on my channel. It's from a few weeks ago now, but I'll just read through what it says. The only thing I leave out is at the end of it, there's a section that's like a fictional example of how the lockstep environment would, most people would experience that lockstep environment, which is bullshit anyway, because it's done from a propaganda spin point of view, where the characters within that fictional example obviously love everything that's being done to them without question, but anyway, I just read through the actual description of the lockstep narrative. And that is what we're seeing happening across most of the world. It is a police state. I'm not going to sugarcoat it anymore. I've tried for years now in different ways to present some of these ideas in such a way that it doesn't prod people's fear nipple to such a degree that they automatically go, oh no, it can't be real because that would just be too scary. Who's giving you all that fear? It's not me. I'm not making up a bullshit story about how there's some alleged virus that's killing people and you've all got to be shit scared and stay at home. No, that's the mainstream media repeating information that's been pumped through them via the governmental agencies, who are repeating bullshit that's pumped through them by the global infrastructure that is working towards narratives that are meant to be happening within the next decade that will be changing your entire world. They're the ones projecting all this fear at you, not me. What I've been doing is trying to move that fear out the way, or if it has any genuine validity of something to be concerned about, then helping people develop the abilities to see what is actually worth me being worried about. Is this something that I should genuinely be concerned about, or is it all just another possibility? Could be, might be. And I've tried many different ways of expressing when it comes to these kind of concepts, like talking about nationhood and the illusions of authority and the way government dominates people and the kind of mass psychology that's implemented. I've tried many different ways of describing the same things so that hopefully people will not be so shocked at what they're being told that they react defensively like most people do when you tell them the unpleasant truth. They react defensively because that's just a survival instinct. You have your own individual bodily desire to survive. Your thoughts that construct the world as you experience it, the world that you think is the reality you're participating in, that has a need to survive as well. It has a psychological need to be sustained, because otherwise your entire mind has to, in effect, rewrite itself. You have to build up again. So what do you mean the world isn't the way I was told? Oh shit, I've got to build my world again then. So of course, people react in defense of that psychological structure that they call their world, the perception of their world. But it's beyond that point now. Here in the UK, several weeks ago now, I did an episode called 3 Weeks to Freedom, because Bojo the clown had said, oh, we'll only have lockdown for another 3 weeks and then, you'll all be okay and we'll go back to normal. And I made the point of saying, okay, all you, so-called debunkers and whatever, we're going to have 3 weeks and then we'll see what happens at the end of the 3 weeks. Was the lockdown dropped? Did we go back to normal? No. And now it's more weeks after that 3 weeks, and the UK media is still pushing the idea of, well, we've got to be so careful. We could have another major outbreak because they're all coming out of their houses and going to the beach. Oh no, but Dominic Cummings can go to Durham Castle. That's okay, yeah, because he's got the magic immunity because he works for government. He works an essential job, so therefore he's magically immune. I'm not going to say it any differently anymore. You are witnessing the beginning of the cementing of, maybe a better way of saying it, because this has been building up for many years. You are witnessing the cementing of a police state environment. On the surface, most of what you see would be similar to a Stasi state, where its population is kept in a moderate level of fear of being in trouble with the authorities for some infraction that they don't even realize they're causing, because there is that Kafkaesque confusion about what is actually legally or lawfully allowed and what is not. Are they rules? Are they guidelines? Are they legal requirements? Are they laws? And nobody knows. It's all just confused. And at the same time, that level of mild fear means that they will self-police. They will report their neighbours for being in the garden for too long. They will report people they see walking down the road more than once a day, or becomes a snitch culture. And that snitching is rewarded in different ways. Good dogs get sausages. So if you're a good little dog and you help perpetuate the system and the bullshit that it sells people, then you'll get rewards. You will be allowed to go and have your little restaurant meal as long as you sit in a little plastic booth, and don't get too close to anybody else in the restaurant, and all these other stupid requirements that are like being in a kindergarten version of a prison. It's a prison for 5-year-olds, psychologically, spiritually, mentally, 5-year-olds. But I feel there is no point trying to word it differently anymore. We've got to the stage where there is no immunity to, as I often do, to circle all the way back to my original point. There is no immunity to the truth. You can be upset by it. You can struggle against it. You can deny it for your entire life if you want to, but it will still be the truth. And when you've found a truth, I say a truth, not the truth, when you've found a truth, it's like your immune system learns to deal with it. Your psychology learns to deal with this sudden new part of reality that you've been presented with or realized or discovered, and it becomes part of your reality. As the cliche goes, once you see, you cannot unsee. So once you are infected, do a little caveat with like bunny ears, parentheses, once you are infected by the truth virus, there is no getting away from it. There is no curing it. You can live in denial, and that denial will make you ill. The denial at the moment on a global, if you think about it from a mass mind point of view, the denial that is going on across most of the nation's populations is causing them to become sick. The reason a lot of this shit is happening in different nations is because the mass mind of the people who live in that nation has become sickened through the effort to deny the reality that they are experiencing. That denial emanates into corruption and pollution into the environment, because we're not in a vacuum. We don't live in isolation. We are in a feedback loop between our environment and ourselves. So if we're constantly in denial of the reality that's happening around us, that gets recycled back as pollutant into the environment itself. So it creates a perpetual cycle and a descending, I'm sure you can get the point. It just gets worse and worse, basically, which is why we end up again with another cliche of it's got to get worse before it gets better. I think we are experiencing some of that worse now. And I say we just as a general sort of global point of view, because I'm not in the USA at the moment. I'm not subject to being in one of those riots. I don't have some police officer kneeling on my neck, shit like that. But there is this same effect happening in most of the countries around the world. It is not... it is no longer believable to say that they're doing it for our own good. It's in our best interests because there's this dangerous virus. No, this is the implementation of a police state. And if you can't accept that reality, if you keep trying to deny it, then you're just helping to amplify the illness that has led to the implementation of a police state. So you're just making it stronger by denying it. Once you realize what it is, you can start addressing it. Once you accept and can see an illness for what it is, you can't treat it. If it's just something that, oh, well, it's just the way it is. People's limbs rot and fall off. We don't know why. Maybe there's some illness there that's causing it to happen. And until you start seeing it for what it is, you can't address it to try and heal it. Yeah. I think I've said enough on that point. And I know I've been rattling on. So I'll wind it up at that. Hopefully that makes sense. There is no immunity to truth. Truth is the truth, whether you like it or not. You can try and deny it, but it's still going to be what it is. Yeah. Think of it like a virus, but your own self, your immune system, which is not just the physical, it's also psychological. You have a psychological immune system. The self will defend itself. And I know some people get fixated on the ego element, but the ego element is like the front operating system of how your system works, your body machine, your body computer, however you want to label it. The ego is just the front of shop, the front facing operating system. It is not you. So your ego changes quite a lot through your lives. Your personality can change a fair bit, not necessarily completely, but it can develop and change over time. But it will defend itself. The ego in particular will defend itself, because the ego, being that front operating system, has the delusion embedded into it at its foundation. So the ego thinks that it is you. The ego thinks it is the self, but it's not. It's just the interacting part of your psychology.
Yeah, watch that clip from the movie Revolver with, I think it's about a 10-minute clip. You can find it on YouTube. And that explains that really well, that scene where he goes back to see this guy and he's fighting with his ego in the lift, in the elevator. I don't know if anyone's seen that scene. But it's good because it actually it explains it. It's a good explanation of the ego. Because at the end, you've got to watch it all the way to the end. It's about a 10-minute scene. And the movie's called, I think, Revolver. Yeah. With Jason Statham. That's the one.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, don't watch the whole movie. Don't watch the whole movie. But just that 10-minute bit where I think you can find it, where he's fighting with his own demons, if you like, his own egos and stuff. It's worth a watch. Because it does explain it as it is. And at the end, it's brilliant. So, yeah, watch it.
It is like a reflection of the inner battle as well. I know we sort of talked about this kind of point a little bit in recent weeks. You know, so Stacey's saying in this comment, it's all order out of chaos. Yeah, I agree. I got it in my notes of, mentioning ordo ab chaos, which is what the system likes to use in its fake phoenix revolutions. It creates a fair amount of chaos, so that once people start to get fatigued by the sheer craziness, and once they start to die, en masse and whatever, the saviors come riding over the hill and go, oh, we can save you. You just need to sign here, sir. You just need to give us this authority over you, and then we can save you all from the chaos.
Yeah, you mentioned what's happening over in the USA, which was, and I don't know if you mentioned Trump's tweets. We mentioned them last week about his tweeting getting, flagged up as being fact checked. Now it's been sort of even promoting violence and stuff, because apparently he put one out when the looting starts, the shooting starts, or that sort of stuff. And the fact that tonight, I think it's New York City's under curfew tonight. I just saw that pop up before. So they've locked down. Yeah.
Washington, D.C. as well have implemented a curfew. And when they say implementing a curfew, that means it is martial law. Because you cannot have a curfew without there being martial law, basically.
Yeah, and he's increased the police to 8,000 in New York, I was saying, from 4,000. But Trump, even there was an article today, I don't know if you saw it, where he was, the phone call he made was leaked by the press. where he's demanded. He phoned the governors up, and this phone call apparently was recorded and leaked by the press this afternoon. And he was saying basically you've got to, with all this stuff going on in each state, so you have to dominate. If you don't dominate, you're wasting your time. He also goes on to say you've got to arrest people, you have to track people, you have to put them in jail for 10 years, and you'll never see this stuff again, he added. We all have all the resources. Oh, my computer's just, there we go, flashed off. He says we've got all the resources, so I don't know what you're doing. So he's basically, saying ramp it up, throw them in jail, this sort of stuff.
In that, you can see how he's still playing his part of being the, well, I didn't know it was happening. Whereas I cannot believe, I cannot accept that he's completely unaware that there are various agendas being operated, and this kind of action, these kind of actions that have been taking place are to deliberately generate chaos, so that the public will start demanding that a more authoritarian order is implemented. I put in my notes about the left and the right. And I've said about that kind of political opposition shit that they do. But if you go again and check that lockstep narrative, this is the kind of thing they're talking about. And I know I've talked about this for many years now. A big reason why they keep putting in the media all these ideas of the crazy lefties, and how they keep banging on about how the crazy lefties who are in power in government at the moment are fucking everything up, and they're trying to turn us all into one big collectivist, socialist, communistic super state and all this kind of. And how do the public react? The public go the other way to the danger that they're being presented with. So there's a deliberate reason why they keep telling the public, like, oh, the dangerous lefties, look at all the crazy lefties, it's Antifa, it's all this, oh, lefties, so that a large portion of the public move to the right. So they've been deliberately amplifying the certain parts of the ideological right who would accept a more fascist, basically, to put it simply, a more fascist environment, because it suits their ideological perspective, while at the same time potentially protecting them from the threat of the crazy collectivists on the left. So they've been pushing, they want the majority of the population of the world to go to the right, so that then, under that ideological auspice of the right-wing bullshit political spectrum, you'll be more willing to accept that, oh, well, it's necessary for it to be a police state, because there's these crazy people who do crazy rioting and destroy stuff because they believe in Antifa and whatever. It's cartoonish, the way they present it.
And people pushing back against racism, which seems so bad, still on the ground, still in everyday life there, still really bad. I'd sort of thought, I'd made it as a joke, I thought the new uniform of the Ku Klux Klan is the police in Minnesota, isn't it, or something? Half of them are members or something. Someone was saying it's actually the KKK, and there they are wearing police uniforms and executions live on TV, it seems, and then the reaction is what we see now. That's the reaction. The whole country's going up in arms about it.
In the narrative as well, it is similar to the TV series that they put out a while ago, The Watchmen. And that plays on the race war, race riots, black versus white kind of narrative element. And they portray the police as being outright fascists, Ku Klux Klan members, neo-Nazis, all this kind of stuff. So they're giving a lot of the public, certainly a sizable demographic of the public, this concept of, the extreme right wing and the extreme left wing, whereas the reality is basically it's people who will go to an extreme to push their ideological point of view. whether it's left or right doesn't matter really. That's context. But the point is, these are people, personality types, who will resort to using terror, resort to using violence, resort to using destruction to try and force you, to try and intimidate you, threaten you into accepting their ideology.
Yeah.
That's not the remit of one side or the other. They both do it. The whole political structure does it.
Yes.
Governments use terror against us. So you look up the definition of terrorism, the governments themselves use terror against us.
Yeah, and that's
like I said earlier, that imagery, that video footage of George Floyd being murdered in front of witnesses is another classic example of they using terror against the public.
Yeah, and Trump showing his true colours at last, it seems. What he's really prepared to do to his own people, if it comes to it, because they know what's going on in their own country with the racism problem. They know. They live there. You know, they know what's going on in their own culture in that sense. Well, they should do. And that's all these people who were thinking Trump's some sort of savior of his sort of, you know, some people still think that's the case. They thought Obama was a savior, for God's sakes. It's like, come on. Like you said, these guys are all in that game. They're not playing. They're playing against us, you know, to achieve their own ends, whether it be their own political or whatever, or money. But then higher up the chain you go, it's more dark or whatever, and it's you know, but it's feeding into that. You know, it's not going to do something good all of a sudden and say, no, we've got to wake up for ourselves to do that and just come up with a new system, or get the system we've got now, but get rid of the corruption, greed, and paedophilia and all that shit. Maybe that would change things a lot, you know, or out them, reveal them, and they scuttle like cockroaches away and they hide away, or they kill themselves or something, you know. They're outed, we know what's going on. And once that sort of level of, you know, information is out there and people know stuff, they can create their own, you know, like I say, systems, whatever, new systems. We don't have these crazy presidents and prime ministers and stuff, you know, who wanted to steal your crown. And it seems that guy who wanted to steal the crown or whatever, or claim a crown, another crown claimer, it's my crown and you must all do as I say. It's like, wow, you know, that's sort of, we're still in that mindset, you know. It's insanity. It's crazy. We're all sovereign. We're all kings and queens, all of us, you know, apart from the ones at that sort of higher end of that pyramid, because I think they're just unsavable, because that's why they're pulling all the latest tricks on us and trying to get us to, you know, do all this mad stuff, like send our children to prison, like you said, not to school. You know, turning it into little prisons. I saw that little clip that was up online the other day. The guy was just showing the classroom layouts and stuff in this sort of, I'd call it an infant school for infants, you know, 4, 5, 6 ages. And that would traumatize any kid. And parents aren't sending their kids to school because of that, you know, where they're is like a, you know, locked away in isolation almost. You know, it's silly. You can't do that to young minds. Children need to play, and there's evidence out there to say that kids are less likely to get it anyway. You know,
more likely to be struck and killed by lightning.
Yeah, they've got, you know, they've got a stronger system. They're not going to get this. It's just, but no, must follow the rules, must do what government says, must do what the chief medical officers and advisors say. This is how we need to go forward in our lives and live in this crazy. It's something, like you say, you wouldn't have imagined this 6 months back. You know,
it would also, for children that age, be such a traumatizing contradiction between going from a home environment where the adults around them would be interacting with them directly. You know, I certainly hope so. Anyway, there might be a few parents that are severely over the top with the fear, but you know, most of the time your parents at home with the kids, you'd be interacting with them directly and physically. You know, you wouldn't be standing off from them and stuff like that. And then the kids get sent to a school where they're treated like radioactive material.
Yeah.
That would make them feel so rejected, so isolated, and in so much fear that everyone else around them must be somehow dangerous, because everybody's like keeping away from each other and woodied and washing their hands. For children that age, that would absolutely embed in their psychology
Yeah.
that the best place for them is to stay locked in at home, which perfectly suits the system, who will then have a screen in front of that child, so all the information being presented to them can be closely controlled and curated, as they call it. In other words, the indoctrination can be finely tuned. Yeah?
Mm.
And the kids are going to be scared shitless of going outside and interacting with other kids and stuff like that. It's horrible. It's outright abuse. It's outright child abuse, as far as I'm concerned.
And teachers and people like that, I think some are saying it. You know, they are speaking out and saying it's going to cause more mental health issues. I mean, they were all bigger on mental health, weren't they? Not that long ago, it was a big deal over here. It was always all mentioned everywhere.
Until you come up with the numbers of suicides because the government fucking people over, they don't want to talk about it then. But if you want to tell them about your mental illness and you want to join their little club and you want to get the little badge that says you have whatever condition, they'll happily talk about it all day long.
Yeah, but it seems that, you know, the children, like you say, they're the ones that, it's funny, we said this a few weeks back, it's the younger ones going back first, not putting the older ones back. It seems they want to get the young ones acclimatized, normalized into the new normal, which is abnormal, as you know, quickly, you know, when the, you know, get it going now, get the schools open, let's get this moving.
I'm obviously just speculating with this, but if they do carry on with the bullshit, then I can see it ending up with a claim on their part that by the time we get to September, I think it is, when senior schools would be going back, you know, the older children going back to autumn term, that they'll turn around and claim that, oh well, because we relaxed the lockdown too soon or too much or too many people took the piss, there's now so many more cases and now we're getting the second wave, so therefore the older children just can't go back to school again anyway. And that will further push you have to be connected online and your kids will do school online instead.
Work home as well, educate home, you know, everything just from your little space or whatever you're in,
from your cubicle. Like in Fifth Element, in his little, you know, cubicle apartment. And like some of the other stuff we've seen in recent years, the sewer tubes and stuff like that. I know we've talked about that kind of stuff before. Mega city, new city, smart city, all that kind of bullshit. The Plandopolis environment of the technocracy, where you're treated as a number, like a termite in the termite mound. That is in effect what they're trying to construct. But rather than being controlled by pheromones that are emitted by the queen of the hive, instead you're infected by the virtualized pheromones of the indoctrination that comes at you via the screen that is your primary contact with the outside world. Because you don't want to go outside because it's dangerous. Not only might you get infected by some illness, but you might encounter crazy people that are rioting or something like that, or you might look at a police officer the wrong way and he ends up wanting to kill you. You might as well stay in your box. Yeah. All very, I feel anyway, I know people can debate this stuff for whatever until it's too fucking late, which is a lot of what's going on at the moment, I think, and why the rise of the kind of COINTELPRO interference that has been happening since the beginning of the year. You know, because they want to keep delaying people, because if they keep delaying you, eventually it will be too late. And I'm not suggesting you got to go out there and start doing crazy things and, you know, expecting some kind of different result. As has been proved multiple times through history, you go out and have a violent revolution and you kill the current king, like Cromwell did, you chop his head off, and then not long after you go, oh, well, the people didn't like this new environment, so we've got to put a king back on the throne, and oh, well, we're back to the same old shit again. And just like in France, they had their revolution, but look at the state of France now. And just like Russia, they had their revolution. Look at the state of Russia now, and China. And, then that's not even going into the details of, well, what caused the revolution? Who funded it? Who was selling them the weapons? All those kind of detailed questions. Just the very fact that every revolution has resulted in us still being in the same old shit now.
Yeah, it
So
revolves.
if
Goes
violent
round.
revolutions
Yeah.
worked, surely it would have worked by now, because there's been lots of them through history and we're still in the same shit. So violent revolutions do not work.
No.
There's other ways of doing stuff. I think I sort of mentioned this last week when I was ranting about this kind of thing, but the concept that if we don't have this system, then it will be complete chaos and nothing will work and everybody will be eating each other in the streets and, dogs living with cats and just all that kind of silliness that gets thrown around. Whereas the reality is, whenever you've had a bunch of people sharing an environment together, but without the overarching domination of some little bunch of people that claim that they're in charge and they're the government or they're the authority or whatever, that gathering of people sharing that environment find ways to get on with each other, and they divide work and responsibilities amongst themselves in such a way that the community functions like an organism. Yeah, there's some people that do go out and do the hunting or growing of the food. They generate the food resources. There's some people that build devices to gather water. So there's water resources. You get the idea, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
The things that make human beings operate as a community, as a society, are not given to us like magic technology from a governmental body. They existed before the concept of government ever fucking existed.
Yeah.
So this idea that just because the current status quo of the system suddenly falls apart, that everything's going to be shit, is just a fear fence. I've spoken about this ages ago, the use of fear fences. It's a fear fence that's given to us by the system, so that whenever somebody brings up the idea of, well, what would life be like without government? Do we really need them? You immediately go, oh, fear, 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 run away, attack that person for saying such crazy things, because we'd all be eating each other if it wasn't for government. So you've never been outside your own town, have you? Have you never been anywhere else in the world? Have you never read history, looked at the reality around you and seen that there's plenty of examples of communities, even what you could call a country, an entire country, operating autonomously without the need of a bunch of people wearing uniforms with, or costumes with little symbols on that say they're in charge. Yeah, a lot of the stuff that we mostly take for granted in the day-to-day of how society operates, most of them are necessities like food and water supplies and stuff like that. Most of those things would carry on regardless whether there was or was not a government.
Yeah, exactly. And people would still maintain them and run them because everybody
we all need to
we all
eat and
need.
drink.
Yeah, exactly.
It's one of the principles about anarchism that people just struggle so much with. When there is a need, somebody will come up to provide for that need if you have methods of reciprocation. So what in the ancient past used to be things like bartering, eventually over time became systems of currency, of coinage and paper money and whatever, but it all represents the same thing. I need food. I can either grow it or rear that food for myself, or I can do something else that generates these little bits of currency, these little bits of IOUs, and then I exchange that with somebody who is growing food, and I get my food necessity from those other people. That infrastructure will operate whether there is or is not an authority. Because if there's a possibility to profit or benefit from an exchange like that, somebody will come along and provide for that exchange so that they benefit or profit out of the exchange. These things, I think sometimes they can be too simple or seemingly too simplistic, that people struggle with them because they think, oh, that can't be true because it's just not complex enough. It needs to be more complicated. Otherwise, certainly it wouldn't work. Surely it wouldn't work unless it had more of these knobs and buttons and whirly wheels and things that make it do what it does. So, you hungry? Yeah. Do you have something you can exchange with somebody else for food? Yeah. There you go. Where's the government involvement in that exchange? Where is the principle in the laws of reality, the laws of nature, that says there has to be a government there before you can have that exchange with somebody else?
Yeah, I mean, or they'd rather have them, like say, start looting, and then they've got the excuse to start shooting them.
Yeah.
I
think that's why I say Trump playing his role. Because even though he can be bombastic and whatever, he's not dumb. I've never took him to be dumb. He's not stupid to make such a stupid statement. So he made that statement deliberately with forethought. It may very well have been, he might have had advisors with him saying, maybe you should say this, sir, or maybe you should add this part into the comment here, yeah? So I don't think he's just there like a dumb schmuck sat on his gold toilet going, oh, yeah, fucking, yeah, shooting, looting, way. No, it's deliberate, stoking the fire.
Yeah. And then to do what they did in that event, where the guy was murdered or executed or whatever you want to call it, just pointlessly killed, or his life ended for just nothing.
At the moment, I'm more inclined
to tip
to say,
people over the edge. Do you think? He has done that to a lot of people because of the lockdown as well and everything else.
Everybody, well, I shouldn't say everybody, but a lot of people are very frustrated, very anxious. They need, think about the fact that it's now summer. There's all this built-up energy. We're getting into the hot months of the year.
Yeah.
Again, I think it was Malcolm X that said something along the lines of, the summer months are the months for rioting. When the weather gets hot, people start getting overexcited and riots become like a playtime of the summer months. I think the incident itself at the moment, I'm still more inclined to say that it was real. I do question whether there's elements about it that seem like a lie hop, like they knew something was about to go snap and they jumped on it as soon as it happened. And that's why, like I said earlier, the media was all over it like a rash, and they were pumping that imagery out on every fucking news report. That's beyond, don't let a good crisis go to waste. It's almost like they were conveniently waiting for it to happen. So as soon as it did, all these little plans got switched on, like the organizing of the protesters, shit like that can be done fairly quickly on the fly, as it were. A few phone calls, get a few people together, organize some resources. Not necessarily that long of a preparation requirement, but it pushes the boundary a bit to believe that across the scale, because think of how this has spread all across the USA and other places in the world as well, that doesn't happen quickly like that. That takes an organizing group with funding, and then in comes those NGOs that have tentacles reaching back to certain individuals, etc.
Yeah, and pandemics and such. Yeah. Yeah.
Infodemic. I think the main thing that's come out of the scamdemic is, well, two elements. One is the public being pushed in such a way that they've acquiesced to having a police state enacted around them without much protest or question. but also it's implanted this concept that furthers what Trump initially talked about when he put the idea under the name of fake news. You know,
Well, we know why that. Yeah.
They have to control information on the internet to make sure that bad ideas,
Yes,
infectious ideas, don't spread virally via the internet technology. So the infodemic, I think, is probably the most vital part of the scamdemic. But it was also a beginning. It's like the first foot on the beach of the beginning of the enacting of a police state. The rioting now is like the second wave.
the excuse
This is them
piling
on the fuel onto the fire. They've got the spark going. Yeah, they've set the kindling, and now they're piling the fuel on top. So it won't take long before a lot of Americans are demanding that the police take more action to deal with the crazy rioters. That's asking for a police state, for martial law.
Yeah. We've got, like I say, New York is under curfew, which is a huge city.
Yeah.
I mean, and they just do this thing now. I mean, because of the excuse with the virus, and all that stuff. Now they've got people almost normalized to, all right, just stay in, get this, order online, keep going, don't really change anything really, keep this going, and people will just carry on like that. Like I say, when you go to school, how long is that going to be like that? Is it going to be like that just going forward and that's it? You're not going to change these measures back. Like we said, how far they're going to go? We'll go 3 steps forward and only 1 step back. And
even if they do roll it back, how long is it going to take to get to the point where they actually do that? And by the time we get to there, will people even remember what it was like before they enacted all these changes?
Keep them in place. Yeah. I think, though, let's hope that there is a pushback by people, teachers, parents, this sort of thing, pointing out how absurd and how abnormal it is going forward. I mean, there might be pressure to put that, stop that happening and put it back to what it was. If they don't, then, like I say, it is that push towards homeschooling with the virtual reality goggles on and never really connecting with anybody, and be like that movie, just put the game suit on, get into your big game suit, get into it, and your whole world's there. Go wherever you want. You think you're there.
You can win the keys to win the kingdom.
With the Elon Musk Neuralink. Oh yeah, and he went to the did he launch 2 astronauts the other day? Someone was saying, did you see it? I was like, no. Why would I want to see them? Another rocket blasting into space. It's like, it's interesting.
I remembered to mention it. I forgot to put it in my notes.
They
have supposedly sent 2 NASA astronauts up to the ISS.
Yes.
So that's confirmation now that a commercial enterprise, a corporate commercial enterprise, SpaceX, which Elon Musk's little space project game, has been interwoven into a governmental infrastructure, which NASA and JPL, they were the ones that were supposedly doing all the American space stuff, but now it's been commercialized. Because now they are subcontracting out to a third-party commercial company. So space is going to be a major element of this, coming decade. And I know we sort of mentioned all the Space Force stuff and everything as well. Yeah? I haven't had the chance to watch through it yet, but supposedly there's a new comedy Netflix series based on Space Force. I'm curious to see how they weave the propaganda in that. I've watched some of it so far, but yeah.
Is that a series or a movie?
Yeah,
it's a series.
A Netflix series.
Okay, I did see it pop up. Yeah, it did pop up. I didn't know if it was it didn't say if it was a movie or whatever, but it looked a bit unfunny.
Serialized. Well, I exactly laughed at it. What I've seen so far. No. and it's definitely got propaganda woven into it. So this is the new reality where space is corporatized, and your chosen corporation. When I say corporation, just think whatever flag flies over your nation's capital. That's your corporate logo. Yeah, so your space is being corporatized, and your corporation, your chosen corporation, is getting involved. They're going up there to plant their flags. They want to have a base on the moon and lead to Mars and blah blah blah. But that doesn't change the reality of what's happening now on the ground. I think maybe that's why that news got buried over the last week, because there's been all this other stuff happening. The news about 2 astronauts being sent up to the space station didn't exactly catch a lot of people's attention.
No. I mean, it's interesting if they're going to start that sort of process off, because they started it off in 1969, didn't they not? And didn't really do much after in the past sort of few decades now, and now they're deciding to go back. I don't know. I reckon there's a secret space program somewhere, and this is all just a shot front of bullshit.
Yeah, multiple
Yeah.
of them.
They've got other methods of technology which they don't display to you, or whatever. Still using old rocket fuels and tanks. It's like, come on, guys,
Yeah. We will be introduced to a lot more new technology in the coming years. Most of it is going to be about locking you into this virtualized screen environment.
Yes. Yeah. Keeping you locked in.
The virus can be used as well as another vehicle cover story, another cover story, as reason for why more people end up working from home or being unemployed, because their jobs are considered somewhat non-essential, and the risk of getting infected is too high. Therefore, certain industries are going to be phased out. Certain businesses are going to be weaned out in one way or another, either economically destroyed or physically burnt down, like some of them happening in the USA. But that middle class business owner is going to be weeded out of the system. There will be the big corporations that operate what they will call infrastructure, which includes things like your internet supply and deliveries to your front door and stuff like that. And any other concept of business will be considered dangerous, because you might infect people. There's various ways they can use the virus story to manipulate a lot of this stuff.
Yes.
We have yet to see. We're going to get through the next few years and see just how much they push into this online environment. Because I'm just thinking, looking at the time, I'll wind it up, bring it to a close. And in doing so, with this particular episode, I'm going to say, like, please remember, and I've said this a few times in the past, it was never my intention to be doing this broadcast, podcast, whatever we call it this week. It was never my intention to be doing this for the rest of my life. That wasn't why I set out to do it in the first place. And I didn't have that kind of thinking in my head of, oh yeah, now I'm going to do this forever. I thought I'll do this for a bit, and hopefully enough people will, sort of get the idea or pick up something useful out of the information, and then I'll be off doing other stuff. Because at some point, this environment is going to be pretty much, if not completely, useless to me, because of the way they're pushing it. The infodemic, I mentioned that earlier. Yeah. Eventually, the way I do my thing and the kind of stuff I talk about will not be allowed. They're pushing us slowly onto other platforms. They're basically corralling us into areas that most of the public don't see. It's a methodology called cul-de-sac or cul-de-sacking. They push you into areas that are out of the view of the general populace, and then they plaster right in front of the general populace's face the trending. So that's what YouTube is becoming. Yeah, YouTube is becoming the trending page, and pretty much nothing else gets a look in. So they're actively, and have been for a while, trying to push us out. Eventually, those like myself, is like I won't leave until they push me out. Until, like I'm alluding to, at some point I will just turn the off button because it's become unmanageable.
Yeah.
What the pros, the cons will far outweigh the pros of what I can benefit out of this system. Because I'm not doing this to make money. I'm not doing it to make friends. I didn't come on to the YouTube because, oh yeah, I'll make YouTube videos so I can make friends and meet people. No, I'm grateful I have made friends and I have met lots of great people, but that isn't why I'm here and why I started doing this. I just wanted to get some information out there, get some ideas out there that would hopefully add to that big discussion of where we're going next.
Yeah.
But at some point, this is no longer going to be a useful tool. It's going to become too much of a burden. So, just please be aware at some point in the future, I'm not saying anytime soon, but at some point in the future, the situation is going to become such that I'm just going to walk away from this.
Yeah.
Because I've said so much already. How much more, how many different ways can I say it? And what else do I present? There's plenty of other people doing good stuff online. If you want to learn how to grow a garden, there's loads of people teaching you how to do that kind of stuff. You want to learn to use certain technology like your mixing studio on your computer, there's loads of people doing stuff like that. At some point, this kind of conversation about ideas and information is going to become disallowed.
Yeah.
In that process, it would also become like a social pariah. Most people will not want to listen to you because they've been peer pressured into thinking whatever about you. Yeah. But please keep that in mind. Don't think that this virtual world is your reality. This is part of your reality, but it's not the reality. The reality is when you turn this technology off.
Yes,
In
exactly.
reference to the illness, the alleged walrus and whatever, as we've been saying near enough right from the start, get out there and get some sunshine, get some fresh air, get into nature, and you'll find that will help you. Unless you're, what's the word for it? You're hyperallergenic, or you're somebody that has to live in a bubble or something like that. Yeah, of course, there's exceptions to that rule. But for the vast majority of us, we benefit from being in the sun and in nature. So do some of that. That's the real world. Yeah. So thanks for tuning in and giving us your attention for a couple of hours or so, approximately a couple of hours. Thanks to Peter for joining in the chat, and thanks to Gary for being in for as long as he could. I'm sure he'll be back again, and maybe things will change in the situation both in Spain and here in the UK. So that the lockdown may change a bit. We'll see how things go. But keep talking, keep thinking, keep making use of your mind while you can. Don't believe all the hype. Don't believe all the bullshit. And be careful out there. Thanks again, folks, for tuning in. Thanks for running the chat room. Sorry, I think I looked at the chat room once earlier and I saw the comment from So South about order out of chaos, and that was about it. But thanks to people in the chat room for joining in. Thanks to the moderators for keeping it flowing and keeping interaction going without it being descended into silliness, which is part of what they like to do. But anyway, thanks again, folks.
Cheers, Cookie. Thank you. And everyone in the chat as well. Cheers. And see you on Wednesday.
yes, sorry, I never said that. We'll be back on Wednesday night on Reality Chat Channel, and Steve Tagoose will be on Thursday for the mystery show. So please check them out, and we will be back again on Wednesday. Got
Yep.
cheese.
See you now.